In 2015, the Truth and Reconciliation Report was released. And since that time, land acknowledgments have become quite ubiquitous. We have seen and heard land acknowledgments before government meetings, sports events, memorial events, anything like that. The New Brunswick land acknowledgement, typically, if you had heard it, acknowledge that we reside on the traditional unceded territory of the Wolastoqiyik, the Pescotamakati people, and the Micmac, and that has continued on until 2020, the throne speech, the newly elected government. In the throne speech, there was a land acknowledgement, but it did not acknowledge the unceded part. And people did take notice. What it did acknowledge is that we reside on the ancestral territory. But the word unceded was left out. Was that an accident? Was that simply an omission? As it turns out, no, it was very intentional. And that's why I'm talking today in my Live for Five, part two of Don't Say Unceded. Are we not allowed to say it? Is it best not to say it? Well, these thoughts were confirmed when a year later, the Attorney General, it was leaked in a memo, the CBC broke this story, of how the Attorney General of New Brunswick issued a memo to provincial workers not to use the words unceded and unsurrendered in any land acknowledgements. And think, of course, this includes teachers, provincial employees. Now, why would the government want to drop the words unceded and unsurrendered when, as we've talked in the last few days, when it is simply a fact that the 1725, 1760, 17, those peace and friendship treaties establish the fact, there's proof, incontrovertible evidence that there has never been land ceded or surrendered or anything of the sort. Why would the government want to do that? Well, of course, we have to conclude that there's some reason that we don't want to acknowledge that. There is a lawsuit in the courts right now that we believe, of course, is motivating this decision. Six Wolastoqiyik First Nations have made a title claim on their traditional lands in New Brunswick, about 60% of the land of New Brunswick. This is creating fear among non-Indigenous people that this means First Nations, Indigenous people will take land back and therefore you will lose your house, your business, all that. That court case, the claim refutes that and says, no, this is about crown land, as we have been discussing in the previous days, where our First Nations and Indigenous people want to be at the table and share control of the land, how it's used. At some point in Canadian history, we went from peace and friendship treaty, where the First Nations were invited and encouraged to continue to occupy the land they have occupied and not, as the treaty said, bother, molest, invade the existing colonies, and vice versa. We went from that to Canada, the provinces feeling entitled to simply swallow up all the land, put a claim on it, and declare it ours and use full control. So, as I said before, as a person of white settler descent, I approach these issues with trepidation and listening. For example, one of the issues with land acknowledgement, of course, is it makes us feel like when we simply acknowledge land, whether we use the term unceded or not, it just allows us to kind of tick a box and feel like we're okay, we're acknowledging we're on the land. I have heard the chief Hugh Akagi of the Pescotamakati Nation say, it's easy to make a land acknowledgement because it doesn't touch on the law. He quite pointedly said, we like using the word reconciliation because it's kind of a heart thing. We don't actually need to do anything in terms of policy. That is the danger of any land acknowledgement. But I believe at the very least, we need to acknowledge that we are on unceded territory. What does that do? Well, as we've seen with the current government, if we take that word out, it might let us have our way and start making the argument that no, the land is actually our land. Whereas if we at least, as a starting point, use the word unceded, then perhaps we're under the obligation of starting to think about maybe it's not right that Indigenous people have been left out of the conversation. Maybe our First Nations do have a title to this land claim. Now, why does this touch us in the last few seconds? Because we are all treaty people, okay? You might think, well, that was a long time ago, or that doesn't touch me. No, it absolutely does, because as we mentioned yesterday, we are a nation of laws, and if we need, and everything we do is on that foundation. And so we need to look back and acknowledge, not just a land acknowledgement, although we do need it, and let's put the word unceded in there because that's a fact, but that should be a starting point. So once again, as somebody who is running to be your MLA, yes, of white settler descent, it is incumbent on us, on me, to listen to chiefs such as Chief Hugh Akagi and many others who are talking about the delicate and sensitive natures of this, but also to not just let ourselves off the hook with the land acknowledgements, and then especially to leave out facts like unceded. We are all treaty people. We need to conduct ourselves and especially create laws and policies that take the truth and the facts and the history into account. That's today's Live for 5/7. And join me again tomorrow where we will once again discuss issues that will touch our lives in our riding, because ultimately what I want as your MLA is to have courage with you to participate in change for our common good. That includes things like a better relationship between the provincial government and our Indigenous First Nations on whose unceded land we reside.